Hello everyone, welcome back to Legacy Larder. I'm Andy, and today we are going to make a pie crust. This one is from our 1920 Royal Baking Powder cookbook, and it's called Rich Pastry. This one, there are a couple recipes in there. We may have tried the other one at some point, but today we're going to give this one a go. So let's get into it and see what a pie crust from the 1920s looks like. One of the first things I thought was fairly interesting about this pie crust was that it uses cake flour. It called for pastry flour. I didn't have any pastry flour, but I did have cake flour, and so I looked up to find out why we cared about that. And the reason was kind of interesting. The pastry flour has less protein in it and forms less gluten than your regular all-purpose flour or bread flour. So that means you don't end up with a pie crust that is more like bread than it is like pie crust. You get something that's lighter and flakier. So to start this off, we're going to make a double batch, but in the recipe at the end I'll write it up as a single. But we're going to start here with some cake flour. You would use pastry flour if you wanted to go and purchase that. Cake flour actually has less protein, slightly less protein in it than cake flour, so theoretically this should turn out just fine. So we put in, again, making two pies, so a top and a bottom crust for each. So this is 4 cups of cake flour, and I've got a teaspoon of salt and a teaspoon of baking powder. And if this was 1920, I'd be using Royal Baking Powder, but alas, it is 2019, so we're just going to use the regular old stuff that we have. So we're going to mix this up together a little bit, so that's incorporated, and then we're going to start adding in our shortening. So I've got 2/3 of a cup of vegetable shortening, and we're going to pop that in there. According to the recipe, we just work this in with our fingers, rubbing it in lightly with the fingers. And we're going to add water slowly until it's the right consistency to roll out. We only put in half of the shortening. This is 2/3 of a cup. I've got another 2/3 of a cup at the ready when the time comes for that. Rolling this in with our fingertips. It's important when you're working with pastry crust not to overdo it. You don't want to turn this into a dough like you would with a bread. You're not going to knead this. You want to have some of those little fat bits from the lard spread throughout the dough, because that makes a layer in between. It makes a little air pocket or a little fat pocket between 2 layers of dough, and that is part of what gives you that light, flaky, crispy action. All right, we've got this fairly finger-tipped in here, and now I'm going to start adding a bit of a bit of water, a bit of cold water. When you're working with pastry, also very important to use cold water, cold surfaces, cold tools, cold everything, because you want to try to keep that shortening or lard or butter from going all soft and just making, just melting on you and making a big greasy ball. So a little bit at a time. And we want to get this to a consistency that it's just enough where we can roll it out. Getting closer. Trying not to overwork it too much here. I'm not a pastry chef, so this is a new one for me. I do like making pies once in a while, but not as a profession. Okay, we're getting very close. And things are starting to come together a little bit. Let's see. And if this comes out the way I think it's going to, we should end up with using about 1 cup of cold water. This is water that I had in the refrigerator, so it's quite cold. Close. Just about there, I think. Okay. Trying to be a little bit gentle so we don't wreck all of our work with the fingertip vegetable shortening. I think that looks pretty good. It's holding together. I think we could probably roll that out. Okay. Yeah, I think we'll work with that. So that ended up being about a cup of water, about a cup of very cold water. All right, so now I'm going to take half of this and actually I'm gonna quarter it. So we're gonna cut this into 4 pieces, and because top and bottom for 2 pies. So let me swap out here and we'll get this ready to roll up. Now here's a little tip I learned from a for real chef. To keep your cutting board, if you're doing anything on a cutting board and you want to keep it from rolling around and sliding across the counter, if you're cutting things, chopping things, rolling things out, wet a paper towel and put that under the cutting board. And then that cutting board is rock solid. You're gonna have to work really hard to move it. So try that out and save yourself some frustration. We have our pastry dough, our rich pastry, on the chopping block, and we're gonna cut this into 4 bits so we can make our tops and bottoms for 2 pies. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's pretty close. All right, here's what the inside looks like. It's not kneaded into you know, it's still kind of a rough knead. There should be bits of shortening in there that we want to keep, so our pies can benefit from that. I'm going to use the 2 larger pieces for the bottoms, I think. I've got a little bit of flour here that I can use to dust my board set to the side. Okay, so candidate number 1. Roll this out thin, and we're going to add more shortening to this and make layers of shortening inside the dough. So roll this out, try to make it fairly thin. Okay, so that looks pretty good for now. Now I've got another 2/3 of a cup of shortening right here, and we're going to take half of this, well, sorry, like a quarter of this, and put it in little bits here and fold the sides in and roll it out some more. This is more like little smears of shortening than little bits of shortening, but get it in there the best you can. It doesn't have to be perfect. Shortening smeared. Now, we want to fold up our pastry dough. Fold the top and bottom like this, and then the sides over like this to make a little pocket. And what we just did there was make a whole bunch of layers of shortening and dough. So all of that, this is all going to make our crispy, delicious, flaky crust. Now we're going to gently roll this out again. Trying to maintain, trying to keep everything from coming apart on me here. And maybe a bit of flour. This would be, I don't know if you've ever watched Julia Child, of course, the only Julia. She had a chunk of marble in her kitchen on her countertop that, you know, marble being stone, it was colder than this wood is, than this butcher block stuff. And so she would, so her pastries and anything she was doing with dough or something delicate like this, she would work on that marble. And someday I might do that. Alright, things are going to get a little sticky here to the bottom, so I'm using my offset spatula, offset scraper thing, and I'm going to lift this up so I can reflour myself. And put the floured side down that I had before, a bit more on this side. This is going to be worth it, folks. Don't you worry. It's going to be fantastic. And I want to see what a pie crust recipe from 1920 tastes like. It should be good. Actually, you may not see what it actually tastes like in this video. Sorry about that, but because I have to make the rest of the pie. I don't want to just make pie crust and be like, that's a tasty pie crust. I will make a whole pie and try that whole pie. Okay, that looks pretty good. So we've rolled it out thin, we put more shortening in there, we folded it up and rolled it out again, and now we've got a pie crust that has layers, many layers of shortening and pastry. So this should give us a light flaky crust. Now we just have to transfer this into a pie pan, and then I will make the rest of the bits that we need, the other bottom and the two tops, and we will blind bake the bottoms in the oven so you can see what that process looks like. Okay, so let's load this up gently into pie plate here. This is so soft. It feels like it's going to, I'm excited about this. I think it's going to be a good one because it just feels very soft and supple. I know that there's a lot of shortening in here, so theoretically this should make a really, really flaky crust. So fingers are crossed on this one. We should have a good product here, a good end result. And everybody loves a nice thick crust. Like if you're gonna have a pie, you wanna have, the crust should be, that's just as important, maybe more important than what's in that pie. You can make an apple pie or a rhubarb pie, a cherry pie, but if the insides are good, yeah, but the one thing that everybody talks about when they have a pie is the crust. Oh, that crust just wasn't quite done, or ooh, it was so nice and light and flaky. That's what people talk about, and that's what I'm hoping this crust, I want this crust to be a crust that people talk about. That's what I'm hoping for. Okay, I'm gonna grab a fork now, and we'll poke some holes in this and get it ready for the blind bake. Okay, so to make sure that we don't have big bubbles forming, we're gonna do a couple of things. Number one is we're gonna poke some holes in the bottom of this crust with just with a fork, so then air can escape. That's thing number one. So we'll get that stabbed a little bit. So if you're feeling stabby, make yourself a pie. That's thing number one. Thing number two is we're going to put some parchment paper in here and then fill it up with pie weights, or in my case, I've got some old beans that I use for pie weights. So, nothing fancy, just stick your parchment paper in there. And then, I've got a bunch of old beans that I've kept around for many years, and I use these as pie weights. So, fill up your pie pan with those beans. Now the weight of these pushes down on the pie crust to be like your double insurance policy that you don't have those bubbles coming up. Now this is set. I'm going to do another one of these so we have two bottoms, and we'll stick them in the oven and bake them. 2 pies. Now let's get them in the oven and get that blind bake done. All right, we just finished our blind bake. That was 15 minutes at 425 degrees. Now everything is very hot, but it should be pre-cooked. So then when we do put our fillings into it, we won't have that mushy, uncooked bottom pie crust that everybody judges you for. So let's dump off the beans and see what this looks like and maybe sneak a taste. One pie done. Now I'll get the other one and then show you what these look like. All right, taking a look at our crust here, you can see that it's not all the way done. There's still some soft spots in there of, you know, uncooked dough, but we've got a head start on the process. So we've given ourselves 15 minutes of cooking time, without all of the moisture of the filling that's going to go in here. And the crust itself, just take a little piece here. The crust itself, it definitely appears very light and flaky. It just crumbled right off in my fingers, and we'll see what it tastes like. It should be just pretty plain because there's just salt and baking soda and flour. So, oh my gosh. I think we've mostly forgotten how to make good pie crust, according to this. I recommend you make a pie today. As soon as you watch this, make a pie and use this pie crust. It's really, really good. It's light and flaky. It's buttery. It's very smooth because of the cake flour that we used. Pastry flour would be the same way. This is an incredible difference over making pie crust with just regular flour, which is the only thing I've ever done. This is way different and really, really worth having a box of cake flour around if you're going to be making a pie once in a while. I think this is now my new go-to pie crust recipe. I recommend it is for you as well. Try it out once and see what you think about it. But it's definitely worth at least one try. I'm going to box this up, and in our next show, I will be putting a pie together with this. So, hope to see you then. This is Legacy Larder. I'm Andy. Be good to each other, and I hope to see you again soon.